Starting your own practice is hard for many chiropractors. It's riddled with both struggles and successes. But here at the Chiropractic Philanthropist, we make it easy by having chiropreneurs and entrepreneurs share their struggles and lessons learned in life and business so that you don't have to make the same mistakes. And now here's your host, Dr. Ed Osborne.
Hey Doc, want to start a successful social media marketing campaign that will get you anywhere from 10 to 45 qualified new patients contacting you for appointments? Of course you would. You probably already have been shown how to do it, so why haven't you implemented? Most doctors don't have the time and they don't care to spend the money trying to figure out what methods work. 3S Chiropractic Systems has put in the time for you and have been testing the methods for years, so if you want to surge new patients every month, that's it, right at your fingertips. The company is run by chiropractors with years of web and social media marketing experience, offering you a complete, affordable, done-for-you package. Get this system. It's swooping across the globe and is geographically exclusive, so find out right now if your area is still available. They offer full money-back guarantee for the first month, so there is absolutely no risk. Apply at 3schiropracticsystems.com/TCP to make sure you don't miss out. All right, TCP listeners, I have an incredible guest today, and that is actually Dr. Daniel Bronstein. Dr. Daniel, how you doing today?
Hey, buddy. Thanks for having me on.
I got to tell you, I mean, we're not gonna flow today like we normally do on TCP. So I'm loving this. This is going to be a conversation, but it's going to be incredibly valuable. I'm not even going to share who you are today. Hopefully, what I'll do is actually so anyone who's listening right now, docs, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the show notes our previous episode. You can learn all about Dr. Daniel and what he does, and just track back to the previous episode that we did which is one of the highest downloaded episodes ever, by the way. And today the discussion is actually some advice, just straight up value and advice for the millennial. And so Dr. Daniel, when you reached out and we just had our pre-chat, what is the discussion? Why is it so important we talk to millennials? And what is this discussion we're going to have today?
So first and foremost, I got to give a shout out to a close friend of mine, Mary Flannery, for even starting this conversation. She's, into recruitment at Life West. As a matter of fact, she's, probably the godmother of recruitment over there. But I started to realize with the coaching and the consulting that I'm doing with a lot of docs my age, that there is a vast communication gulf that I think we're doing a very poor job of bridging in chiropractic. Chiropractic students are coming out by and large. They're scared. They're saddled with a ton of debt in a way that has never, ever been conceived of before. Past generations were easily able to pay off their debts. They were able to bill insurance for, a whole bunch of money, no out-of-pocket expense to their patients. And our generation is confronted with a totally different set of challenges for which we can't use the same skills that applied even one generation ago. Additionally, we know that millennial parents in particular have a totally different set of needs than the parents that came in the Generation X generation. And namely, that's that they want to actively participate in the decisions of their families. So the paternalistic doctors of a generation ago that basically said, it's my way or the highway, you got to do what I say, will no longer fly. Because these new parents, they want to be involved. They want to be contributors to that tribe. And so what I'm noticing is that students are trying to apply the tools of Generation X coaches and their doctor mentors, and they're falling flat on their faces. I think additionally, these doctors are really, really used to kind of regurgitating the things that they're hearing either in school or what they're reading online. And that isn't going to fly anymore either. Gone are the days in the chiropractic profession where we had an entire generation, really, of philosopher scientists who were doing this groundwork, who were reading and publishing primary sources, not just in case studies, but also in the bench science, right? We've got a couple, namely, Heidi Havik is doing some amazing work out of New Zealand. We've got guys like, Dr. John Minardi, who I just had on my podcast, who are really starting to bridge that gap. But they're rare. And I think it's really important for, all the students and even the young docs who are listening to really start taking ownership of our profession, start to read and publish those primary sources, stop playing into all the fear-based tactics that we see on the internet and really go back to a time, even 50, 60 years ago where our profession was actually out front. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about that, Ed, because I know what you do, and I know that you agree with me on this.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who's listening and who I work with, and I have just like a dream 100 people that I work with, and a lot of them are, I guess, so I had to ask you, how do we define millennials? And it's anyone you were saying born before 1977, essentially, right?
After 1977.
Oh, sorry, after, excuse me. So, yeah, so I mean, I definitely have some experience with that, and I think I want to bring it back to almost a message that I've conveyed a few times, probably over the last 12 months, even on TCP. Is that so? Are we saying, Doc, that coaches and mentors who have been out of practice, so they don't practice anymore, and they're doing management, coaching, mentoring of other chiropractors, especially the millennial, is there what they're teaching isn't relevant, and are they out of touch then with the millennial? Is that really what we're saying?
Well, okay, so when I was going through school, we were being taught that the coaches and the consultants in the chiropractic profession eat their young, right? That's a cliche, and we were cautioned against getting into bed with these folks because they were disingenuous. And we know that there's a predatory relationship between many of the coaching and consulting firms around in chiropractic with new grads because they're desperate. They need somebody to help them. And these students who are looking for mentorship, maybe they're getting sort of what they want to hear, but they aren't necessarily hearing it from somebody who has the experience and who's able to innovate at that level. And so they keep replicating the same old tired formula. And that's why, in my personal opinion, the profession isn't growing. We do see, a lot of folks who are starting to bridge outside of chiropractic, like yourself, to help, like I said, leverage, that degree in a way that can net income, right? I mean, because we want our docs to be successful. We want them to make money. We want them to live a prosperous lifestyle. But what I'll tell you is that, and we talked about this on the last podcast, I think having a $200,000 degree and coming straight out of school and not practicing chiropractic, I think it's foolish. You would call that a bad return on your investment, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do all this other stuff by no means. I think we need to diversify our revenue streams. That's what makes most of us who are very successful. But most of the chiropractors that I know, if we're talking totally bluntly, who do not do well in practice, frankly, they just suck at chiropractic. And it's not to say that, you can't necessarily get out of practice and leverage things later. But I think if you're fresh out of school and you're looking for a way to make that chiropractic practice work, you got to deliver the goods and deliver on your promises. And if you're getting advice from a doctor who hasn't been in practice for even as long as 5 years, it's bad advice.
Yeah. Here's a good point. So, I don't know if people who are listening, so what I help a lot of chiropractors do is market and create virtual online content that can be downloaded. And it's essentially what their knowledge is, right? So whether it be, whatever they're passionate about. Right. And I get lots of questions from people from chiros, and they'll say, Ed, how do I create marketing and online funnels to generate new patients? And I'm like, I have no idea, because I'm not in the ditch, man. I'm not there. So I don't even feel like I have it's just, I don't have the legs to make that run. I can't do it because I'm not in it.
Well, let's talk about this too, because I mean, the niche that you've found, Ed, and your ability to be able to communicate to your colleagues is totally brilliant, right? It's brilliant because you're taking this need and desire and this knowledge base, and you're essentially crowdsourcing it with other people who have that sort of innovation streak in them, right? I don't work with online entrepreneurs. I don't work with marketers. I work with folks who want to build practices like I have. I use marketing in my practice. So, when it comes to marketing, people ask me, well, how do I get new patients? My first knee-jerk result is, well, start getting results in your practice and people will want to be a part of it. But that's a bridge too far, because we're locked into this, again, 30-year-old mindset where you have to screen every single weekend and bring in 50 to 60 new patients in order for your practice to run. Meanwhile, we have practices that have a larger back door than the front door, and we're ruining reputations. And so I think, getting these newer docs to understand that sort of work in the trenches up front in order to build a successful practice is about reinvesting in yourself, about reinvesting in your knowledge base, about contributing to the scientific zeitgeist outside of your practice. No other healthcare profession in the world operates off of a different set of rules. Chiropractors are the only ones, it seems like. And I think that's, again, one of the reasons why we're having such a hard time bringing our new docs into prosperity.
And tagging off of your statement there of operating on someone else's rules, that's exactly how I felt when I was being managed in chiropractic, because, it was clearly, first of all, it was someone who was no longer in practice after a certain amount of time, for whatever reasons we won't say. But for that reason alone, it was like at the end of the day, after 13 years of practice, regardless of whether I had started actually to grow my practice, I hit the numbers I wanted. But even when I hit the goals and the numbers I wanted, Doc, I had no sense of who I was anymore, because I was basically reading script I was regurgitating everything else from what I had learned and been told is what I had to do. And I think that's what I find with the millennials is when they start to go down that path, and I get on these conversations with them all the time, is that they say, like, they almost lose a sense of who they are. Because you go to school for so long, you come out, and then you're told you have to actually become someone different, which can be okay, but you do lose a sense of who you are and your purpose when you have to conform, put it that way.
Right. And I totally agree with you on that one, because I think most of these students are coming out and they have the knowledge base and they have the desire, but they don't have the standard operating procedures.
Right.
And that's one of the things, honestly, that I had to learn the hard way. I had to spend a lot of time with docs who are already doing it really, really well, so I could mirror what makes them successful. And to be fair, I had to pay a lot of time and a lot of money into it in order to get that IP, which I think is something that's also kind of missing, right? With students who are coming out with $200,000 worth of debt and they expect to get everything for free because they've already put their time in. And that's a tough nut to crack too. They're not investing any of their own blood, sweat, and tears, and they want to get all this content without having to do any work. That also begets the point, right? In order for these students to really get to where they need to be, I think the best piece of advice or a call to action for them is to really focus on spending as much time investing in critical appraisal. And that just doesn't mean necessarily of yourself, but also of other people. And being honest with yourself about what's working and what's not. Students tend to kind of make deals with the devil, I think, coming out of chiropractic college, so they can get that magical recipe to be successful. Didn't we get into chiropractic first and foremost so that we could get sick people well? Having a strong business that's built on charisma but isn't built on results is a problem also. And I find that a lot of students using those tools from 30 years ago are building entirely on charisma without any recognition whatsoever of whether or not their chiropractic skills will get sick people well.
Mm-hmm. Anytime I've gone down that path, and I've done it several times, whether it be in my brick and mortar or because here's what I've learned is business, doesn't matter what you're doing. It has to come from the heart. Right. And every time I went down that road, there would be a ceiling and then there would be a crash. Like you have to be able to make everything your own. It has to be where you want to show up for practice and just be incredibly passionate to be there. And one thing that I want to touch on too is, whenever I see social media, whenever I see entrepreneurs talking about this, but I see it in the chiropractic space too. When we have the discussion of millennials, the word entitlement comes up. What are your thoughts on that?
The authors that I've read have talked a lot about this, and I think it's super important for those of us who are right on that cusp. And you're a little older than me, so I think you're just barely on the marker. We have to understand where it comes from, because most authors who've studied the millennial generation disagree that entitlement comes from pure whininess, right? Which is what all the old folks who are saying, get off my lawn, that's what they think. And the fact is, most of these millennials are in this position in the first place because the generation before traded up on their millennials' birthright. right? They agree that the Generation Xers reared their kids in a way that their parents reared them. And again, this is the problem that we're having in chiropractic, because we're applying rules of a 30-year-old generation that doesn't apply to us anymore. Remember, chiropractic students coming out of school right now have over $200,000 worth of debt on average. That's uncanny with comparison to the previous generation. I still talk to docs who graduated with less than 50 grand worth of debt and they paid it off in 1 year. Remember, the housing crisis happened right when all of us were getting ready to get out of school. Remember that none of us could have gotten loans, because the banks were just not lending to us. There was no, good risk, and there's no collateral involved. And we had to make do with what we had. We also came out of chiropractic college with an ever-changing chiropractic healthcare economy that didn't really apply back in the 80s and 90s, right? Again, like insurance, it's dying breed. There's a dying culture there. Students get out of chiropractic school and they try to sign up for panels, and they're just going to get completely washed out if they don't have somebody who really plugs into these insurance providers and allows them to kind of glean from their knowledge base. So they have a totally unique set of principles, a totally unique set of understanding, and we have to be able to communicate with them in that way that makes sense. We just started a residency program in my office where we take those doctors in, specifically new grads who are of that millennial generation, to help them through the process of critical appraisal and peer review and making themselves better by learning in that mold, as opposed to the predatory sort of associateship relationships we've had in the past. And we find that speaking that language, understanding them, and really sort of like taking them from where they are has been very, very successful. The entitlement piece, I see it, but I don't agree with it.
It's interesting because, and this is just, I make observations, but I do observe too that, when there is the innovator, so someone who is innovation is new technology, new delivery, a new system, a new way of doing things, right? When there's one of those people who show up in our profession, they get shut down pretty quick. Do you ever see that?
Well, I mean, I'm seeing it happen with you too. Listen, I'm a keen observer of all things social media, but I try to stay off of it because I start fights wherever I go, and I don't need that negativity in my life. The fact is, you're right? We as chiropractors do a really good job, again, of like setting the bar, and it's so low and it's so mediocre that if chiropractors, can't even meet that standard, then we completely shun them. The fact is, the mediocre standard that we have for even just care delivery in chiropractic is based, again, on old principles. Yeah. It's old school, sort of give, love, and serve mentality that takes for granted the fact that chiropractors need to make money, and they need to make money quickly. You can leverage yourself as a salesperson, or you can get some freaking results in a reliable way, continue to sell, continue to spread that message, and have a sustainable practice that isn't built on gimmicks, right? I think, again, millennials, they totally get this, but they're not getting it from a lot of people right now, right? Because the innovators, like you, I call you an innovator in the chiropractic profession, are being slammed on a regular basis because people want what you got, right? It's true. It's absolutely true. I mean, and we talked about this on the last podcast too, man. Like, I know a lot of chiropractors who are innovators who you'll never, ever hear from because they're not charismatic, right? These are the guys who are kicking butt in private practice, but they don't care. Yeah. They don't care about all the glimmer and the glam because they just want to go out and take care of people. And so we got to be able to draw a line, happy medium, I think, between those very charismatic innovators like you and some of the silent people to incentivize them to give back to bring the whole profession up.
Yeah.
I'm kind of one of these guys.
I got to tell you, there's nothing quite like fighting for subluxation and chiropractic philosophy and the right to do screenings in your province state and getting brought up against your board and getting fined and all those things. I got a thick skin now. So when it came into this space, in the marketing space, I have no problem polarizing people. So I get it. And there's people who love what you do and there's people who won't. And you speak to the people who love what you do. And it brings me back. I want to bring the subluxation conversation in because there's a certain, no matter what I put into my brick and mortar, it always came back to one thing. And it always came back to my philosophy. And philosophy was always the one thing that anchored my practice. And it was the one thing, it didn't matter what, when I had a conversation with a patient, it was the one piece of education that they understood. Like they get it. Like it was such a simple concept. How important is it for philosophy, and are the millennials getting it?
I'm really glad you brought this up. I know we're running a little short on time, but I'm going to absolutely dig into this real quick. When I was speaking at Parker last week, and in the previous talks that I've given to a bunch of other students, everybody knows that I am a preceptor doc for Life West, and I speak to students quite often. The common refrain is, well, our chiropractic philosophy is not evidence-informed or evidence-based, and it's antiquated, and we don't need to know where we came from to know where we're going. This stinks to me of somebody who does not understand critical appraisal, does not understand the philosophy of science. Remember, the most famous scientific philosopher that we as chiropractors pay attention to is a guy named Thomas Kuhn, who wrote the Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he was really the first academic in the modern time to discuss what's known as paradigm shifting. Now, we take it for granted, guys like you and I, but when students come up to me and say, you know what, well, there isn't a paper that, proves this, and there isn't a paper that proves that, my first response is, where's your brain? Where's your critical appraisal? Where's your ability to go look at the bench science, right? To read the textbooks, to be able to extrapolate in a way that's evidence informed in your practice, that's based on the foundation of vitalism, so that you can do what's right by your patients, right? Again, I hope I don't insult anybody. Well, yes, I do. But if you're a chiropractor and you do not take into account what Stevenson was talking about back in the 1920s, you're missing the entire point. I know a lot of people who talk about chiropractic and subluxation as it simply pertains to the safety pin cycle. And that's not what Stevenson was talking about. I like people who talk to me about philosophy, but have never even read the green books, right? Even putting it into context of the other scientific philosophers that were writing in the 1920s and 30s, this is, the beginning of the scientific revolution, really. We had a lot of existentialist philosophers that were writing. BJ and Dede, they knew what was happening because it was surrounding them at all times. Vitalism is an absolute 100% cornerstone of what we do here. Millennials can go back and they can look at all this stuff to know where we've come, because one more generation without really studying this philosophy, and it's going to be gone. Yeah. Chiropractic is going to be unrecognizable. I think millennials can continue to innovate. They can continue to build upon that foundation in a way that's meaningful without sacrificing their birthright. They just have to dig in and actually read and appraise that literature on their own without being swayed by other people.
Here's something I've learned in online and just in business, and that is that it's not about the facts, and it's not so facts. When we talk about online business, facts is really science. If we were to say, translate this to chiropractic, here's what does sell, and it's stories and it's results. Like people want to see results. You deliver, like, we'll go back and circle back to that conversation of like, look, no, if you deliver the goods, then you'll solve your new patient problem.
Totally.
Retention problem, education problem. You resolve all those things.
Where did we get lost along the way? I have theories about this. I think it has something to do with managed care. Chiropractors were able to bill for a ton of money without having to get results. I still see PI mills in California, personal injury mills, that are built entirely on bilking insurance companies for as much money as humanly possible. Patients come out and they're the exact same, but the doctor walks away with six figures because of the severity of the case. If you don't have to get results to make money, of course the results become on one of the lower priorities. But run a cash practice that's built entirely on those results, you'll learn what works real quick, right? And then when you have families that actually get those miraculous results that we used to read about in all of our green books, they'll set everybody they know to you, and you'll never have to screen a day in your life, right? We cannot continue to do what was done 30 years ago, because we're just going to go straight down the drain, right? And managed care is going to dry up. In the United States, we know it's already going to be gone. Right? Stop billing insurance. It's a waste of your time.
It's crazy though, because like I talk to docs who are incredibly successful, have MRI clinics, they have medics in their business, multidisciplinary practices, and incredibly successful entrepreneurs. And it's so amazing. You know what I found is at their core is philosophy.
Right.
They actually still have they're like, hey Ed, I know you're straight, like quote unquote straight, who God knows whatever that means anymore, and they're like, And I just want you to know that, like, it's important for them to know that, hey, I'm totally subluxation based. So they are at their core. It always comes back to the core of the philosophy. It really does.
It's the mission statement, right? That value set is congruent and everything arises from your central mission, right? Yeah. If your mission is weak, if your value set is weak, you're going to be strayed everywhere. And a master, jack of all trades is a master of none, right?
And it's the delivery, right? I mean, or I should say the delivery can be different, but the one thing that we'll circle back on this conversation, which you touched on, is the one thing that unites us as chiropractors is we all want to serve and help. It's the one out of 270 conversations I've had with chiropractors, incredibly successful people. The one thing that unites us is, well, there's two things. One thing that unites us is certainly the need and the at our core, we want to help people, and at our core as well is our philosophy. It's there. If as we kind of wrap it up today as well, if there was one point, one resource, something that you want millennials to know that they can actually start to actually put into action, possibly, what that last piece of advice would you give?
So, thinking about calls to action, I think the first and foremost thing that you have to do is you got to stay off the internet in terms of like reading people's expert opinions, right? I think, again, the most flamboyant, most charismatic people, with some exceptions, right, are the ones who are blasting the most on social media. They're compartmentalizing our research, they're compartmentalizing our philosophy, and doctors are exchanging the actual critical appraisal with believing everything they read on Facebook. Okay, that's number one. And I'm not saying that ads and leveraging and marketing on social media is a bad thing. By all means, that's great. But you as the scientific philosopher, you as the chiropractor need to reinvest in the primary sources. That's a huge, huge thing. You don't know where to start? Order the chiropractic textbook and start there. And then give me a call and I'll send you other homework assignments. That's number one. Number two is, and we talked about this before on the last podcast we recorded, but you need to have a coach, and it needs to be somebody that actually does what you want to do. Not somebody who's out of practice, not somebody who's doing the same old tired stuff from 30 years ago. You need to have somebody who will help you get there because they're in the trenches with you. That accountability is really, really important. And I think a lot of docs are missing that mark. I still talk to coaches who've been out of practice 30 years, and they think they're sending all their, students and clients down the path to success. Meanwhile, you look at their stats and they've got, 75% of their doctors are in bankruptcy and they're losing their minds. So those two things, by and large, I think need to happen better. I think students need to start reaching out to docs who are less than 5 years out so they can see those toils, they can see those trials and tribulations, and they can learn mistakes. And I think they need to spend some money and invest in themselves moving forward. I'm talking about how to make money seminars. I'm talking about like reinvesting in their scientific acumen so they can become better scientists, doctors, and philosophers first. Everything else follows.
Outstanding. Thank you for that. And as I kind of wrap it up, I'm gonna throw out two concepts or two words, and one is the word delicate. Don't be delicate. Never be delicate. There's no crying in chiropractic. Yeah, I love that. I'm going to take that with me. The second one is respect. So show respect for your colleagues and other professionals, but also, giving respect, also you get respect. And I can tell you one thing, I tend to polarize. I tend to, I can kind of attract that, whether it be in marketing or social media. But there's one thing that I do is that I respect everyone's opinion, like straight up. Yeah, I don't have to agree with you, but I respect you for
that's super important. And in closing, this will just be the last thing I want to say, because I did bring this up the last time I spoke to the students, is, again, we do a lot of hero worship in this profession, and we venerate certain docs without taking them to task, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing or something we should take personal when we bring debate to the floor. Right. That happens in any other academic environment except for chiropractic. Right. We can respect and honor the people that came before us. We can respect and honor our peers, but we can also challenge them. And that's what makes everybody in this profession better. Right. I can disagree with somebody that I really like, and that's OK, because that's what I do. I'm a scientific philosopher in this profession. I want to bring something to the table, and I want to make sure that we are all held accountable and raise that standard.
I like it, and that's perfect, because I got to tell you, if we all agreed in this profession on everything, then we'd probably be just as stagnant as we are today and marginalized. So it is good to have a little bit of strife. But yeah, I think to grow as a profession, we have to and expand as a profession, we definitely need to address that things have changed. There's innovation and we need to adapt. All right. Thank you, Dr. Daniel. Brought it today. I'm so interested to see with a response. I'm really going to encourage people to bring up the conversation, share this episode on social media, of course, where we told you not to go, but share it up. I want to really get this out there, and I want to light up the conversation for the millennials and really get some valid feedback and support for everyone. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for sharing today.
So you've heard the struggles, you've heard the successes, and this episode is done. But there's still so much more to come and so much more to learn. Head on over to thechiropracticphilanthropist.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive free practice building tips and strategies, including how to market your practice with your very own podcast and so much more. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Chiropractic Philanthropist.